Doctors. Have you ever witnessed the meltdown of a birth that was clearly a result of a cheating spouse? What was the aftermath? It wasn't at the birth. But I used to work for a urologist who did vasectomies. He did a vas on a guy. Then did the requisite 3-month and 6-month semen analysis follow-up tests to make sure it worked. The 6-month test showed no sperm. So the guy was all set to not father children. Fast forward 2 years. And he calls my surgeon fuming, ranting and raving about how he ducked up to vasectomy and now his wife is pregnant. So doc orders another semen analysis, of course. It comes back totally negative. A very awkward conversation ensued in the exam room that I'd have paid anything to eavesdrop on. The best part is, the couple left the office pissed off, with the wife sticking to her story that she would never cheat on her husband, and the husband in complete denial that she'd ever lie about that. Last I heard they were gearing up to sue or something. But I don't work there anymore, so I don't know what happened. These stories remind me of something I experienced firsthand the day after my son was born. Nurse: so your baby's blood type is A. Wife: like me. Nurse: and daddy? Me: no. I am A. Nurse: you must be mistaken. That combination isn't possible. Nurse: I'll leave you guys to it. Me: pulls out phone and frantically Googles baby blood type combinations. The nurse was wrong. A patient asked if both possible fathers could be in her C-section so that neither would miss the birth of his child. They'd figure out the details later. A friend went through it. He went down a dark path of drugs and we'd lost touch after a big fight about how he was ducked up all the time and he was wasting his life. He contacted me out of the blue to say that I was right. He needed to step up and be responsible and that he had quit everything cold turkey because he was going to be a dad. Apparently he was going to help his girl get sober and they were going to have this kid and get married. He really got his shit together over the course of the pregnancy. He was clean, got a job, and got a nice place to live. She was not so dedicated. She continued to use meth, pills, and heroin throughout the pregnancy. She ended up going into labor early at 26 weeks. She gave birth to a premature addicted baby boy. He went directly into the NICU. She stayed in the hospital and visited the NICU until she was released. She then disappeared. She never visited the baby, never called to check on it, didn't go home, just fell off the face of the planet. He however spent every spare second at the NICU with the baby. However, as the weeks passed it became pretty obvious that the baby wasn't his as skin tone evened out and hair came in. Chick was blonde with blue eyes. My friend is super pale blonde with blue eyes. The baby was clearly half Hispanic. He wanted to adopt the baby but they wouldn't let him. The state took it and it went into foster care. It totally ducked him up for a long time. He relapsed for a while and got into a bad car accident. He spent some time in the hospital and then got everything back together. He's married now to a really nice girl and rapidly had 4 kids that are his with another currently on the way. Not a doctor, but still a relevant story. When I was born, my father was 100% certain that I was not his because his blood type and my mom's blood type couldn't have produced me. He punched a hole in the wall in the hospital and yelled at my mom refusing to sign the birth certificate because I have A blood. My mom has 0 neg and he was positive that he had AB neg because that's what his brand new dog tags said. He was in the army at the time. Turns out, they misprinted his dog tags. All his old tags said A positive. TL Doctor, a typo on my dad's army issued dog tags almost caused my parents to divorce. I am not a doctor. But when my godson was born, the nurse told us about this guy who had gotten 2 girls pregnant at the same time. They both wound up at that hospital just down the hall from each other giving birth hours apart. What a lucky guy. My friend was a delivery nurse for the hospital that all high-risk pregnancies go to. They are extremely busy and she has brought a lot of people into the world. She once delivered a baby in the parking lot by herself. This has come up on a weekly basis. But she shared the best story with us. A Caucasian couple come in and the mother is in labor. When the dude is filling out paperwork, the mother takes the doctor aside. She tells him there is a chance that the baby may be a different race than the father and to let her know as soon as the baby is born. The baby is born. The doctor turns to the mother and announces loudly, Congratulations on your white baby boy. This is fun. My wife's cousin's third came out black. She's married to the pastiest Irish guy you can find. Their marriage did not end. But this has created an interesting story. Grandma tells everyone that he is just really Native American. Her husband was 1-2 Native. He is now 15 and still no one in the family will admit that he's black. Late to the party. But one of my colleagues in anesthesia once placed an epidural in a heavily tattooed lady. Apparently she had Steve's lunchbox tattooed above her vagina. She gave birth. The OB-GYN turned to the father in the room and said, "Congratulations, Steve." The guy stated, "My name isn't Steve." No meltdowns or anything. Just an awkward moment. I hope I am not too late. My mom is a labor and delivery nurse. One time she had a patient whose parents were present during her stay at the hospital. The staff there have a whiteboard with some general information about the patients like blood type, time spent in the wing, and like how far along. This information is nameless for HIPAA reasons and instead has a patient's number. So this patient happened to be the only one in the wing at the time. Her father was walking back from the cafeteria at one point and noticed the board. He stopped one of the nurses and asked if the blood type for the patient on the board was correct. He knew his daughter was the only patient there. It was B. The nurse confirmed it was correct. Turns out he knew his and his wife's blood type. He was O and his wife was A. This combination will never yield a B baby. He brings his wife out and just points at the board and this look of shock washes over her. TL doctor father of patient in labor finds out his wife cuckolded him 25 years later by knowing his blood type. Punnett squares. Late to the party and I am not a doctor but I am white and my wife is black. I am frog belly fluorescent white, think ginger light. My wife is earthy brown. No one would ever describe her as light-skinned. We have a daughter. She had a difficult labor and our daughter was delivered via C-section. She did not really get to see our daughter immediately after delivery. Later in our room she was dozing and they brought our daughter in. My relatives and my wife's relatives all commented on how my daughter looked so much like me and was not even close to the pigmentation of my wife. So I carried my daughter over to my wife and gently woke her and showed her our daughter and said, "I do not think she's yours." We all had a good laugh. My friend told me this story of hers. Woman and her husband were having their first child and it was the friend's first ever delivery of gin. When she got the baby out she looked at it, then looked at the parents and asked, "Okay, which of you has 6 fingers?" The mother broke down crying, yelling, "I am sorry," to the husband. Their neighbor apparently had 6 fingers. When my wife was born, she was very yellow and the nurse quietly asked her mom about the paternity when her dad was out of the room. She was just born with a bad case of jaundice and that nurse was an idiot. Not a doctor. But my best friend's stepbrother was that guy who found out he wasn't the father because the baby was black. I'll try to make it short. Dude had gone to rehab twice and was doing really well. He came back home for a weekend and ducked his XGF. Left and went back to his house states away to continue his newfound life. Got the call she was pregnant and dropped everything to come back and be a father. We were really worried he would relapse but he was great. So 9 months of preparation goes by. He was gonna be an awesome dad. All worried about relapsing were gone and he seemed ready to become the best dad he could ever be. Baby comes out. Everybody's happy. Nurse takes him aside after a few minutes and says, "I want to ask you something. You do know that's not your kid, right?" He says, "What do you mean?" "Well, that baby is at least half black. But the pigments are probably going to really darken." So he goes over to his XGF and asks if there's any ways what the nurse just told him is true. She starts sobbing and breaks down completely. Admits that she ducked a black guy right around time he came back. So he says, "All right. I am glad you and the baby are healthy. Have a nice life." Walks into the waiting room where all the new grandparents are waiting. Cheers. Celebration. Everything good. Yep. Healthy baby. Healthy mom. I am not the father. I am out of here. And walked right out the ducking door. The girl's parents even wanted him to pay and support. He moved back to where he got his life back together and is doing incredibly well. But man, I wish he had all the time back. I am way late to the party with this one, but it's about my mum. She had my brother when she was only 16 and had a very hard birth with him. Back in the time the husband wasn't allowed in the labor room and my grandma was at work. When my brother was born he got stuck, so they had to use forceps, and he was also jaundiced, so he looked like an Asian baby. My grandma turns up after work and is looking at all the babies in the room they were kept and asks which one was her daughter's baby. The nurse points to my brother and him looking all Asian. My grandma storms up to my mum on the ward and said, "Which Asian guy did you sleep with?" Well, my mum thought she was joking, so she said, "I don't know, it was too dark to see." My grandma then proceeded to hit my mum, until a nurse came in and explained. My brother is now 44 and as white can be. I might be the first medical professional to post in this thread. Hot damn. So I am a NICU nurse that was floating to the nursery. A baby was born with a genetic abnormality, had one missing limb but was otherwise doing fine. The pediatrician was in the parents' room discussing with them the follow-up type stuff for the baby, appointments with a geneticist, an orthopedic surgeon, etc. At some point in the conversation the mother asked what the baby's blood type was, to which the pediatrician responded A. The father of the baby insisted that was impossible, as he and his wife, this was their third baby, were both O. The pediatrician got totally flustered and came back to the nursery to verify the lab results. Baby really was A. We even went so far as to draw the baby's blood and attest it. Nope. Capital A. There is absolutely no chance that the baby belonged to that man. The husband left the hospital soon after and didn't show up again until it was time to pick up the mom and baby to bring them home. The mom spent the rest of the hospital stay lying alone, in the dark, mostly hiding under the covers. I heard this from an old client who was an obstetrician. He was telling me stories about when he used to deliver babies at people's homes way back in the day. This was probably 15 years ago when he told me this story, and he was in his 80s, 83 I. Anyway, he was telling me about his son and I asked if he delivered his own son. He said yes and told me the most amazing, heartbreaking, and heartwarming story. In the late 40s, the town ambulance hearse taxi pulls up at his little independent practice out in the boonies of Illinois. A volunteer firefighter comes in and says they have a lady in labor and they won't make it to the hospital, which is over an hour away. He tells them to bring her in. He delivers the baby and mom passes out. They clean her up. They clean up the baby, and all seems normal. Mom wakes up and the doctor comes in to give her the baby. She starts screaming, "Get it away from me." He's all confused and can't figure out what's going on. She keeps flailing around and screaming that she doesn't want to look at it. The doc takes the baby out and comes back. She's calmer but still looks frantic or terrified. He talks to her and she just stares at him like he's got 9 heads. He finally asks, "Well, what do you want me to do with your son?" The mom stays silent for a long time, and as he's getting up to leave, she quietly says, "Can you get rid of him?" The doc asks what she means. She says, "You know, maybe just make him go to sleep so he won't wake up." He said it took everything for him to not beat this woman to death right then and there. He went off on a tangent about how much he loved his work working with all the new mothers in all these little towns full of salt of the earth people with great family values. On and on about how happy it made him bringing life into the world, and this woman wanted him to murder her baby. He asked why and she ends up saying that her husband is in the military and it's not his baby. She couldn't let him find out. He kind of understood her rationale for not letting her husband know. But murder. So he suggested family, an orphanage, and other options back then, none of which seemed appealing in my mind. She said no to all of them because she couldn't risk this coming back to haunt her. He told her he'd see what he could do and he let her rest. The next day, he tried to talk to her again and she was just more adamant about making it sleep. She said she wanted to hold her baby. He refused since he thought she tried to kill him herself. She went nuts. In the end, he sent her home and told her that he'd given the baby to his brother, who was a pastor and was unable to have children. He promised he'd never tell anyone, even the kid, who she was. Then he said he taught her a lesson. If she ever found herself pregnant again, she would come to him whether it was her husband's or not. If he ever found out she went elsewhere, he'd tell everyone the story. He said he did this because he was afraid she'd get knocked up and kill the next one. And he knew he'd find out if she went elsewhere because he was the only baby doctor for 5 towns around and knew other docs at the hospitals. Of course. She could have delivered at home on her own. Now that I think about it, she never had any other kids as far as the doc knew, and he said he did check up on her once or twice with his colleagues. Supposedly, she died from a drug overdose a few years later. The doctor and his wife raised that baby as their own son. His wife wasn't able to have kids. The pastor brother was BS just to make her think he'd already given the baby away. He eventually told his son a very watered-down version of the story when the kid was older. The kid ended up becoming a plastic surgeon and has like 9 kids of his own. He's doing very well. He's very happy. And he probably never would have had a shot had that small-town fireman tried to press onto the hospital and wound up delivering the kid in the middle of nowhere. He was convinced she would have delivered and then smothered the baby by the time they got to the hospital. TL doctor lady gets pregnant by another man. Her husband has no idea because he's in the military. She ends up with a small-town doctor and wants the doc to kill the baby so her husband doesn't find out. Doc raises the baby with his barren wife, and the baby grows up to be a brilliant surgeon who gives the doc tons of grandkids and a huge family he never would have had otherwise. Edit corrected incorrect autocorrects. Edit 2. Someone messaged me with a rough and attitude and asked what kind of client tells stories like this. I am a real estate broker. The doc's son works up here in Chicago. After the doc's wife passed away, he sold his house in southern Illinois and I was helping him find a new home up near the city because he wanted to be closer to his son and grandchildren. When you're showing houses, you've got a lot of time to talk to your clients and trade stories. I've probably got a story for every situation and every topic because of my work. My parents both have blood type O, while mine is A. I asked my mom about it when I was learning the basics of genetics in the 6th grade, and she said that the doctor had told her it was some sort of rare mutation. However, now that I'm older and have remembered it, I am going to ask her about it again, since I am pretty sure that my dad wouldn't know the importance of blood types, and I am positive my mom would have lied in order to make sure I had a good dad. Consider subscribing if you enjoyed this video and if you want to see more of Reddit Universe.